Good morning, good afternoon, and for some also good evening to everybody to our first JIC Open Forum. It's a pleasure to see participants from across the world who have interest to look in how the digital transformation of healthcare is moving forward and how JIC is contributing to that. JIC, the Joint Initiative Council, short JIC. Next slide, please. So I think we have some really engaging and interesting topics on our agenda for today. And I can promise that we have really expert speakers which will talk to you about some of the topics which I think are close to all our hearts, like the COVID-19 case, the international patient summary, which is important for everybody of us, IDMP, perhaps less known, and genomics, really looking into the future. And I will start with a little introduction myself. And to introduce myself also, I'm Ulrike, and I'm the current chair of the JIC. The chairmanship of the JIC is changing between the different standard organizations. Next slide, please. We encourage you really to ask questions all the way long. While the presentations are going on, you can put your questions already in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the Q&A, which is after the presentations. If we can't really answer all the questions, then please provide us your name and we will come back to you separately from that, from today's event. And of course, the recording of this will be available on our JIC website very shortly after we are done today. Next slide, please. So let's get going. And as a chair, it's my pleasure really to give you a short introduction into the JIC, if you are not aware yet what we are doing and what our mission and vision are. Next slide. As I mentioned already, the JIC is a group, a council, which is coming together as a group of standard development organizations, SDOs in short. And it's not a young organization. It was established in 2008. And really as a group of organizations coming together to work together. And then to build further really on the work which each of these organizations is doing separately. So what is our objective? One is really digital transformation. And I think we all have seen that in this time of a pandemic, the digital transformation has really moved ahead with rocket speed, I must say, and has gotten very important. Digital is the new way we are all living in, and I think we show this here by being together just digital. But for the digital transformation, all these standard organizations working together really recognize that it's very important that we have interoperability. If the different systems in healthcare cannot talk to each other, if we don't talk the same language, then we have issues. And that is something which the JIC is trying to avoid. So we are really fostering collaboration between all the standards organization and the clinical community. And as my good colleague Ed Hammond from HL7 once said, there is enough space for everybody of us. So we are not competing with each other, but we are really working together. And with that, we try to really provide high quality health services to the whole healthcare stakeholders, to the whole population across the world. We are really truly global. Next slide, please. Looking at our mission, what do we try to do? As I said already, we aim for interoperability and we want also to avoid that there are overlaps. What already exists doesn't need to be reinvented. And that's why we are talking regularly with each other and informing each other about our activities. And if we develop any inconsistencies, we are approaching those and try to resolve those. With that, we try to have a really greater coordination for the standards which are out there, which are used by the community. And of course, one of the goals also today is really to develop global awareness, what we are doing and how important it is that everybody is really aligned and is creating interoperability. For that, we need to share information, and we have one tool which perhaps is not so much known, but the so-called SKMT, the Standards Knowledge Management Tool, is showing which standards are out there and by the different STOs which are belonging to JIC, and is listing those and is trying to provide information as much as possible. But we also want to be the gateway with whom you can talk and you can seek advice if there are problems on any health informatics standards which need to be developed or which are in development and which is really crossing multiple standard organizations. And last not least, of course, we want to promote the development and the adoption and recognition of all our standards as international standards, because healthcare today is very global. Our core values, and I guess that is something which you will be able to recognize, hopefully also as yours: customer focus, facilitation. As standards development organizations, we are all used to facilitate activities with communities and with users. Openness and transparencies, flexibility, innovation, something which you will see very much represented in the presentations of today, and of course, quality behind it, and respect for each other. Be professionals, and I can tell you only from the time I've been chair now, this is a group which is really working very well and full of respect with each other. Who is part of the JIC? Who are the members? And you see them listed here: CDISC, CEN, DICOM, GS1, HL7, IHE, ISO TC215, LOINC, and Snomed. And you will hear from some of these organizations today. But these are the logos, but there are people behind that. So who are the people who are on the JIC? We'll see some of them presenting today, but you see here the primary members who are representing their standard organizations in the JIC. And these are really people who are providing their expertise, their knowledge, and their commitment to standards worldwide. So with that introduction, I can just say, I hope that you will enjoy what we will present to you. And I ask you to stay informed. Follow us. We have Twitter and LinkedIn accounts. Be informed of what we are doing and what information support we can provide to all of you. And with that, I would like to hand over to the first speaker, who is Jane Miller from Snomed International, and she will talk about the COVID-19 case. I know Jane for a long time with a big pleasure, and she's a very knowledgeable person and the collaboration lead at Snomed International, and works also in the clinical team. She is very active in Snomed in every area and a known person really, not only in the UK, but really worldwide. Jane, it's my pleasure to hear and to listen to you in the next presentation about what you have done when the pandemic came over all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I hand to my colleague Yong?
Hi, my name is Yong Gao, Senior Terminologist from Snomed International. Jen, can you share with us how Snomed International and the LOINC work together on aligning their approach to COVID-19?
Thank you, Yong. Terminology standards, I think, as everybody, could you have the next slide, please? Terminology standards are critical, I think, as everybody knows, to capturing clinical aspects of care, and particularly during the pandemic, such as information related to viruses, to the virus and its different permutations, assays, and clinical characteristics that feed into the public health end. Snomed International and Reagan Street Institute, who support and manage LOINC, have supported care teams in tracking SARS-CoV-2, the virus, and the testing, and COVID-19 disease cases since the beginning of the pandemic. both organizations did this by introducing new content into their respective products. LOINC focused on coding, detailed methods, assays, clinical notes, and case reporting elements related to the pandemic. And Snomed CT, because its core business is about clinical record keeping, clinical documentation, captured the details of the virus, the strains, the disease presentations, vaccination information, and general observables, as well as the wider information related to the care of the individual. In addition to JIC, LOINC and Snomed International are both members of the COVID-19 Interoperability Alliance, which was set up specifically to look at a coordinated approach to data requirements. Thank you.
Jane, can you share in more detail how LOINC and Snomed created and quality assured content for healthcare systems globally to address the pandemic?
Thank you. Next slide, please. So Snomed, from a Snomed International perspective, it has two releases a year of Snomed CT. And in its January 2020 release, it already included some COVID-19 related content, some new and quite a lot of existing content. And then in March 2020, did an interim release for the first time ever, actually, of Snomed CT to include content changes as well as new content that came out of the WHO and ICTV changes to naming conventions for the disease, so that we were ensured we were up to date for the clinical record keeping and the data flows. We've also issued a guide for COVID-19 data coding using Snomed CT, and this is based on requirements of our member countries and other stakeholders who wanted to start to track and record things in a more systematic way. And this has been kept up to date since it was introduced, including the latest vaccination information. And of course, our July 2020 and January 21 information also included additional information, particularly things like information required by the FDA and the European Medicines Agency for the drug adverse event incident reporting for COVID-19. And we've added that information also to our Snomed MEDRA maps to enable reporting, and also to our maps to ICD-10, so that you can get to the latest WHO reporting. I'm not sure how many of you will be aware, but we produce a global patient set, which is free for use across the globe. And we have incorporated our COVID-19 content and existing content into that. And all of this content is freely available at this link. So over to Yong.
Hi, can you tell us more about the ongoing effort and interaction?
Sorry, I missed my Yong. I missed my next slide.
Oh,
please,
okay.
could I have I have another? Oh yes, yes. Thank you very much, Yong. Please carry on.
Next slide. Have you covered all the slides?
No.
Not yet.
No. Sorry, I've lost my current slide. I need to, that's the one, thank you. My slides went out of kilter there, my apologies everybody. So here's an example of where the COVID data has actually, the Snomed COVID data has actually been incorporated into systems in East London. And it's looked at the prevalence of suspected COVID-19 infections and patients from ethnic minority populations, and the outcomes showed a twofold increase in the odds of suspected COVID-19 for South Asian and Black adults compared to white adults, tailoring East London's approach to identification and treatment. Next slide, please. From a LOINC perspective, from the Reagan Street Institute, likewise, in January 2020, they very quickly reached out to the different organizations involved in testing and monitoring COVID-19, including Snomed International, WHO, US CDC and FDA, as well as individual entities in China and Canada and other countries. And they introduced a rapid term creation process for new codes related to COVID-19. So, for example, SARS-CoV-2 terms were created in 2 to 3 days, compared to a median turnaround normally during normal times of about 100+ days. So very, very fast responding to requirements. They introduced some mapping guidance for users, and can I have my slide back, please? Okay. They introduced a complete list of SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 terms for laboratory, clinical documents, case reporting, treatments, and other elements. Please go to next slide, please. Next slide, please. Leave it there, please. LOINC continuously monitors new SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 content to ensure it meets the needs of the community at large, but this includes a regular LOINC in vitro diagnostics coding meeting, and they're receiving requests through their normal submission process. And this graph here actually shows you how over 2020, in March and April, comprised the largest increase of LOINC codes for laboratory testing, and then for documentation and case reporting occurred primarily in May and June of the same year. And if I can go on to the next slide, which is slightly more complicated, but I'd like to just talk you through this. This shows LOINC codes related to SARS-CoV-2 to summarize the data in the all of the US data set. The orange callouts shows representative examples of the number of vendor assays that comprise mappings to each LOINC code in the LIVD mapping file available on the CDC website. And you'll be able to see these slides afterwards, and you can see the link to this. Over to you, Yong. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Can you tell us more about the ongoing efforts and interaction across the JIC partner organizations?
Thank you. Next slide, please. Since the start of the pandemic, as I've already said, we've worked, both organizations have worked hard, and LOINC and Snomed International's US member, the National Library of Medicine, have collaborated in weekly meetings with the US FDA and CDC to discuss and assign codes for COVID-19 testing pertaining to emergency use authorization. This type of collaboration has been critical to COVID-19 in the US, but also because the content is going into LOINC and into the US extension of Snomed International. It's also been some of it's been going into Snomed International content as well. And here is an example. It's quite small on the screen, I can see, but the mappings are weekly. There's a weekly publication of these files on the US CDC website with the mappings to LOINC and Snomed. So please go and have a look at these on this link afterwards. Next slide, please. So in summary, I think I'd like to just say a few words. We've only talked about Snomed and LOINC, and just to close up on that, we continue to monitor and create new content as needed to address developments. And as we all know, this is happening every day. With new variants of the virus, new testing and treatment modalities, and particularly as we go into long COVID and looking at the consequences of the disease and the long-term perspective. These efforts to build a set of common standard codes for the virus and its variants, the clinical manifestations, treatments, assays, etc., will allow ongoing efforts to combat the disease in patients. Going back to what Igmk said, this is in a standard way, in an interoperable way, so that we're all working together. In taking it forward, what we're already seeing is work by our other JIC colleagues, such as CDISC, who are on this call as well. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box. In supporting their clinical trials and public health researchers with a guide and novel data tools, and HL7, who are developing their fire specifications and will potentially, and in some countries already, using Snomed or LOINC in those specifications that relate to the COVID-19 disease. So the JIC, as a collective of standards organizations, has provided us with a forum for the ongoing global collaboration and continues to do so by having these connections between ourselves and enabling interoperability. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Yong, for your questions. And I invite you to put questions into the Q&A box about anything I've mentioned related to Snomed CT or LOINC or CDISC and HL7 work in this area. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jane, for this comprehensive summary of what you did really to address the issues which the pandemic caused and how you try to really help quickly in, as you said, a very unique way to address those and help with coding there. We move to the next project under JIC, and we talk about the International Patient Summary, something I think which is also not only for the standard world interesting, but I think for everybody really, for everybody of us who is a patient. And we have really two experts talking to us about this. The first one is Robert Stegui, who is the chair of SEN TC215, and I can tell you he's a true expert in this space. He has been involved in standard development for a very long time. He's on the board of HL7 Netherlands, but he's also chairing the SEN TC215, which is about health informatics. And he's part, of course, of the JIC, and it's a great pleasure to work with him. And the same is true for Catherine Kronaki, who is the Secretary General of HL7 Europe and very active in digital health, in e-health. She has led the Trillium project on this IPS under the EU and US MOU on e-health. So e-health is really something where she is a great expert and also an expert on electronic health records. So a big pleasure that you both are willing to tell us today about the International Patient Summary. And I hand over to Robert and Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrike, for this kind introduction. Well, welcome all of you. And it's no surprise, I think, if I state that the health system is under pressure. It's not only the season with the flu going around, but especially COVID has taken a toll on our health systems. And it's not just the health systems, it's really the people in there, the healthcare providers that are under stress. And with people being in isolation, parts of healthcare being shut down because of the COVID pandemic, barriers to actually getting healthcare, that's all part of the pressure and building the pressure on the healthcare provider, especially when someone comes along that he or she doesn't know. So if there's a patient, one of the many patients that are out there in the community, what happens to the healthcare provider? And that's not limited to the pandemic. So if we go to the next slide, basically what we see is that the doctors are a minority, and that they're really not always able to do their jobs because of the pressure they're under. A recent report pointed out that there's 15 million doctors only for the population of over 7 billion. And also, there is a lot of information out there, or at least health data is out there. And it's being captured in all kinds of systems, electronic health records, medical records, etc. But basically, they may be data rich, but they're actually information poor. To get the timely information on this unknown patient is really a hard thing for a healthcare provider to do. If we take a look at that on the next slide, then we can see that if such a patient presents itself to the doctor, then what do they need to do? They need to go to the either the filing cabinet or to the system to actually make sure that that they're going in the right direction and they're getting the right data, especially with COVID. But if they have an appointment, there's limited time in the appointment to do all this. So really to get the information, for instance, about vaccinations, it's a hard time. They have to ask the questions to the patient and hope to get the right answer. So what if we go to the next slide, we can see that it's even worse when it's an emergency encounter. There's no scheduled appointment. There's no time to go into the details prior to the appointment. The patient may be unconscious and nobody can find it. So really what's helping there and what the International Patient Summary is concise information. Concise information for the healthcare provider to use to actually understand who is there. But we'll get into that because in the international aspect, there's another problem. If we go to the next slide, you can see that if we have to manage healthcare across borders, which is even more common in the COVID pandemic, even though we don't travel as much, the pressures on the health system will actually send patients to other countries because there's just not enough space in the hospitals. So if you have to navigate that data lake across borders, you have asked questions like, can I actually get this data? Am I allowed to get this? Or if someone asks you as a healthcare provider to give information, can I do that? So it's cross borders, but it's also cross systems. I mean, within countries, there may be different systems operating and that have to exchange. So really there's pressure on the healthcare provider to get that information on this unknown patient. So if we go to the next slide, we see where the International Patient Summary comes in. It really comes in on the next slide, please, as the core data set focused on that individual. So it's no longer an unknown patient. It's a patient with a patient summary that tells you what's going on and whether it's cross-border or cross-system at home, that information will be available in a concise manner to the healthcare provider. And that's really what we're looking at. So really, it provides the consistency in establishing agreements also cross-border to make sure what data is there, how can we translate it, how can we make it available in a format that's really useful and usable to the healthcare provider. That's what we're talking about with the International Patient Summary. Now that I've presented some of the background to the International Patient Summary, I hand over to Catherine to take you into some of the details and also in how we are working together to evolve this into the really useful tool for all healthcare providers around the globe. Catherine.
Thank you, Robert, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. So, as Robert said, healthcare professionals expect a concise extract of the patient's health data that is clinically relevant, useful, and usable for treating the patient at the point of care. The purpose of the IPS The purpose of the IPS is exactly that, to capture the most important and essential content for the patient's known history, the health data essential for safe care. Excuse me for a minute, so the relevant summary will fill some of the gaps in the knowledge of the attending physician, removing some of the questions about the patient that they have in front of them and about the necessary treatment at the point of care. And the IPS is intended to remove also some pressure from the care situation so that the healthcare professional can pay more attention to the patient themselves. So in addition, it would also help reduce some of the growing burden that stems from increasing information overload. Next slide, please. So as you see, the IPS dataset is reusable data blocks, very much like Lego. The International Patient Summary as a specification is described as a simple document because the concept of a document and a section are so pervasive and used everywhere in the healthcare settings. Think of the doctor's letter given to a patient that intends to travel. This was the paradigm actually that we used in the transatlantic care scenarios of Trillium Bridge. It is important, however, not to limit the use of the IPS because the standard regards a document just one type of implementation amongst other implementations. Think, for example, a doctor that is asking an audio interface. Do we know any allergies? What is the current medication? What are the current problems? And the patient summary response. Indeed, the IPS can also be regarded as a set of scalable data blocks that can be carefully reused for other applications. One such data block could be the current medication, as I said just now, or the vaccination summary. Next slide, please. Take as an instance the WHO vaccination certificate, which leverages the IPS data blocks and specifically the IPS section on immunization. The purpose of the IPS is to be first and foremost the patient summary. However, it is a great benefit if the description of the IPS data can support other applications, such as a discharge summary. It would add considerable value to the standard as well as the IPS if it is used this way. So these other information resources like the discharge summary can be used to help with continuity of care and coordination of care among different professionals. Next slide, please. So where we are now at the stage where the first iteration of the standards have been now published. But the IPS must mature and be extended if it is to fulfill the promise and its purpose to serve the health system and the individuals. It must accept and use feedback from implementations. It must continue to evolve if it is to be sustainable, and it must retain its relevance for clinical care above all else. In Europe, for example, there are 3 large projects that are taking the IPS to the next level, at least 3 that I have been involved with. The Gravitate Health, where IPS is used as a lens to highlight key information in the medication leaflet, the electronic health record exchange format, and the survivorship passport, where the IPS is extended to meet the needs of childhood cancer survivors. The allotted time does not permit us to further discuss some of the concrete next steps in standardizing the patient summary. However, this slide and all slides will be made available for you, and we are always available for you to ask direct questions. Next slide. So, building on these first steps of the IPS, we set the stage for connected health data spaces. IPS is a work in progress, very much like the building site here in this slide, where a bridge is constructed. It set the stage for future information bridges among health data spaces conducted by the many SDOs implementing the next steps. It's a great start, but nevertheless, it's daunting in its scope and aspirations. We have no questions about that. If not for the shared view and actions of the SDOs and the Joint Initiative Council, it is difficult to see how we proceed. But there is a will to collaborate, and together we seek to realize its ongoing success, working alongside the wider IPS stakeholder community. Next slide. So how do we work together? Key in collaboration among SDOs is working in connected cycles of standards development, testing, implementation, and feedback, where deliberation and consensus building are emphasized. The JIC provides the level playing field for smooth change management through information sharing. Testing tools, storytelling, and data facilitate going through this cycle in iterations that further interoperability. Next slide. What is very important, however, is that the work of the IPS is also connected to government-led programs and initiatives like the Global Digital Health Partnership. Worth mentioning are also HL7 accelerators, large funding projects like My Health at EU, Horizon, and IMI, and programs like the mHealth Hub and the vaccination certificate for COVID-19, where WHO plays a key role. Next slide. In conclusion, after 293 million miles and 7 minutes of terror, wow, that was one statement of Rob Manning from NASA in February 21, referring to the Mars 2020 project. The International Patient Summary is not rocket science, of course, yet it too needs the same time of commitment and perseverance to succeed. The goal of the IPS, of the Patient Summary, is to deliver a solution worthy for any individual, to provide relevant information for the care of the patient in any place and any time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Robert, for this really nice introduction of the IPS. I'm sure we will get some question on this also, but I really liked also your quote on working together. And I think that's also what the whole JIC is about, on working together. Thank you very much. And with that, we move to the next topic and the next speaker. And it's, of course, a great pleasure to introduce a colleague of mine with whom I'm working together since a very long time, Christian Haye, who is very active also in the e-health and digital health space. He is since 2012 the convener of the ICTC 215 Work Group 6, but he's currently very active together with some of the participants in this call in the European project UNICOM, where IDMP, the identification of medicinal products, is finding some practical application and increased attention. So looking forward to hear from you, Christian, about your passion for IDMP and the work which is happening there.
Thank you, Ulrike. Can you go please on the next slide? Yes, thank you. The problem which we are in general facing regarding medicinal products is not a new, has been recognized last century already. It is around pharmacovigilance. What I mean with that is the collection of data which are necessary to understand what may happen with a specific substance or a combination of substance in terms of a medicinal product. This collection of data is very complicated. And of course, with mass production, so international distribution of products which are changing the brand names and possibly some adjustment in the strength or some substances, that has become really a complicated effort. The WHO Collaborating Center in Uppsala shows with this two graphic I would say the quality of the reports, the adverse event report they receive, and you see about half of the reports from industry and not from industry have or don't have the brand name. We don't know from the report itself what is exactly the medicinal product addressed. And that, of course, they can compensate that. They have a lot of experience over the time to do that, but it is a huge effort. And of course, it slows down the process, the analysis process. But as we know, adverse events can also be caused by a batch, something wrong in a batch in the production. And so you see on the right of these slides, the number of reports with the batch number is extremely low. Okay, so that's the facts on which we are working, and actually the health authorities and actually also the manufacturers have agreed again last century that they should work on this so that we have a better mean to understand what is a medicinal product exactly wherever in the world. On the next slide, you will see we have still some work to do in this space. And that is a slide which has been prepared by a colleague of us in the context of the Unicom project. And I like it because you see we have semantics, which is also something Jane Miller was addressing a bit before. Semantics, what is the meaning of a term? And I yellowed, greens and blued some terms which look like similar, but they are not. And then we see the different brand names we have for this now famous first COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer-BioNTech. So we don't have the same name in the UK, in the EU, in the European Union, and in the US on one hand, and some specificities to describe that product are different in the three countries, jurisdictions, which, if you think at my previous slide, is reflecting the difficulty one has to aggregate information even when the product is exactly the same, like in this case, a specific case, in the three regions. So that is an enormous issue, which was addressed, as I said, about 20 years ago. The next slide shows you a little bit the time scale. We started early 2000s to have discussions in that, and that was led by ICH. This is, I would say, the grouping of the manufacturer and the regulator worldwide, where they discuss and work together to issue guidance on the way to assess medicinal products in space of marketing authorization or inspections, etc. And here they decided to work on this, what was not yet IDMP, but to work to improve data on this product. The next slide shows you when this has been shifted to standard development organizations. For various reasons, ICH was not able to issue that piece of work, so they handed over to actually a free standard development organization, send TC251 at first, ISO TC to 15 seconds, and HL7 International as well. The journey has been, I would say, with milestones. One important milestone was 2012, when the standards have been first published, and then there was a quiet period, and suddenly the regulator understood that with the standard only as it was, or they were, in 2012, implementation was really difficult. So they decided to adopt implementation guides. So actually a second level of standard for supporting the implementation. And I would say in 2018, more or less, everything was done and everything was ready for implementation. But we will see it's not so easy. The journey is never finished in this space. My next slide has a purpose to illustrate that IDMP has the primary purpose to work on adverse events reporting. But actually, already when I was joining TC215 and the working group 6, that was in 2008, I was witnessing a terrible debate between the ones and the others in this working group, about 50 people and in the same room at that time. Some wanted to resolve this regulatory issue, and others said, we don't work only for regulator, we want something to bring a benefit to the whole community, everything. And this is what is illustrated here. The whole community has been recently, I would say, segmented in 5 pillars, where you see on the left, development and production, that is mainly the manufacturer, this area, and it includes the communication with the second pillar, regulation and authorization. So the manufacturer is exchanging information with the regulator, and hopefully the same information, same formatting, same semantics, same identifiers. Once the marketing authorization is provided by this regulator, then we shift to the middle, dissemination and information. These are medicinal product dictionaries. We have various on the market. This is also the bricks to help clinical decision support, which brings us to the 4th pillar, prescription and dispensation. Here we are closer to the product, I would say the physical product and the patient. And then at the very end, utilization and outcome assessments. This is including adverse event reporting, but not only. This is also the analysis of the market to measure the variations in the consumption, think at the antibiotics and this type of a product. And so you see the 5 domains. All that is impacted by IDMP in different layers. So they are illustrated just with 3 lines here, but of course you can see, imagine more. The first one is marketing authorization and the post-marketing surveillance. All that is along this chain. As I said before, the utilization and outcome assessment is extremely important in today's world to understand how public health is evolving, or how public health initiatives should be taken to reduce this consumption of something, a substance, which might lead to negative effects on the public health point of view, etc. But on the second level, the effective use of medicinal product that people use, describe already from the beginning on, and use properly the medicinal product, so that we don't use the wrong product for the wrong disease, to make it simple. And the lower level is the controlled supply chain, and that is interesting because we had some debates around that not so very long ago. Is supply chain included or not in IDMP? Many people were thinking not. But with the pandemic, suddenly people realize that we have sometimes a supply chain issue, and that must be connected to the rest. You cannot isolate the supply chain and think just with your brain and abstract about medicinal product, because at some point of time they are physically here or not here, which is also a supply chain issue we experienced recently. The next slide is illustrating a little bit who was involved in the development of IDMP. I have to say, when I entered the health informatics space, I'm a lawyer. I was a little bit innocent, and one of my challenges by becoming convener of that working group where IDMP is developed, my challenge was to be able to explain what is IDMP. And that is the origin of now what we call the wedding cake. And the wedding cake illustrates that we have some, they're supposed to be silo, but that's for the graphical purpose. We have this 5, say silo, illustrating the substances in pink, in yellow, the route of administration, pharmaceutical dose form, in gray, the measurements, and the combination of these 3 enables to talk about a pharmaceutical product. That is the blue space. The blue space has very little physical existence. You see just the pill in this illustration, but you don't know the name of that pill, and you know very little about that. It is only when it becomes in the green space that we can speak about a medicinal product. A medicinal product is something which has, I would say, the foot on the earth. It is country-specific or region-specific, for Europe, for instance. And that's the reason why you have this box with blisters in it, because that is the way this medicinal product has been granted marketing authorization. And so it will be distributed on the market, prescribed, etc. To organize these 5 standards and the 4 surrounding implementation guides, we needed the involvement of many standard development organizations. I have to say that IGMP was one of the very first JIC, I would say, monitored standard developments. You already saw in the previous slide that it was the combination of SEN, ISO, and HL7 International, these 3 standards together. But then, very quickly, we needed to have a plug with Snomed International, because there are terminologies in it, and that must fit, you know, to what the clinicians are doing. CDISC for the clinical trial, that's very important. We have medicinal product, but we have also investigation medicinal product, which is the same data structure, if you want, but not exactly the same playgrounds, because it's for the investigation. Then we had a little bit later GS1 entering in the discussion, because what I mentioned before, we have the feet on the ground at some point of time, and that is the supply chain, and how do you recognize this product on the supply chain. This is still an ongoing discussion to explain to various actors in this market how that fits together. And last but not least, IHE International. That's also interesting, because I would say here we are at the beginning of the effort. The IHE has a purpose to enable the testing of the good communication about information. And here I have personally a strong expectation that IHE will make progresses in this space, where IHE is not known so much at the moment. If I leave the clinical side away, in the regulatory side, IHE is not very present, but I think there is a huge role to play for IHE in the next future in this space. My next slide has the purpose to illustrate that what has been written in the stone 20 years ago was not in stone. What I mean with that is IGMP has been developed in a specific version of HL7 standards, and now we are in the course of implementation in another version of that HL7 standard, another HL7 standard, namely FIRE. And one of the, I would say, the challenges in front of us is to secure that the standard which is describing, you see this graphic on the left, which you are not supposed to read really, and you see the graphic on the right, also not supposed to read it, but you see visually already that there is a difference. And we need to secure the consistency of this evolution, and that requires a dialogue between all the actors, a little bit like they are doing for the International Patient Summary, where all these lead experts meet regularly to talk about the evolution. When something moves on the left, what is the impact on the right? And here something similar has to happen as well. So that is my conclusion slide, just to see that you understand the challenge which is in front of us regarding the maintenance of the standards along the time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christian, for this very informative presentation. And I encourage all the participants already to put questions into the Q&A box if you have any on this. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce the last speaker of this panel this morning, our time here. So Don Nisham is another really expert in the field of health informatics and standards. He has a world of experiences really working with public, private, government, non-for-profit and international organizations to advance standards in the field of healthcare. He's part of ISO/TC 215 also since a very long time, was the head of delegation for Canada. And currently he is involved and engaged in the subcommittee 1 on genomic information, something which is really looking into the future. And he's co-leading also the roadmap for this. So Don, I'm really sure that we can all learn a lot from you. Over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ulrike, and thank you to all my fellow panelists. It's been a real pleasure to join with you on this great discussion. And I think we've had some really good presentations already in terms of looking how COVID works in the Snomed and LINC world, how we can contribute to international patient summary and data sharing, and the great contribution of standards and medicinal products, and that great example of the needs of vaccine identifiers across the supply chain. So it's my opportunity today to share with you some of the work of ST1 for genomics informatics. Ron Kistler, who is the chair of ST1, and myself, we've both been involved from the early conception to the planning and now to the launch and delivery of the work of ST1. And I would note that ST1 falls under TC 215, ISO TC 215 for health informatics. And it's actually the first subcommittee of TC 215. TC 215 operates, of course, with the Secretariat from ANSI in the US, and the Secretariat for SC1 is the Korean Agency for Technology and Standards out of South Korea. SC1 as a subcommittee now has 20 participating member countries from across Asia, Europe, and North America, and 6 formal liaisons. So this first slide that I want to address really identifies and places our genomics work within an ecosystem. And then we all need to understand where do we fit and how do we work with genomics and genomics informatics. Therefore, what is our ecosystem that we work within? And I want to thank the Global Alliance for Genomics Health and the Broad Institute for sharing this image for our ecosystem. So many of you are likely familiar with the major presence of genome sequencing and gene sequencing. Clearly in the last months and year, the importance of that in COVID-19 virus and its variants and all the sequencing work that has taken place in many countries, and obviously is critical to patient care and vaccine development. Any genome that is sequenced begins with a patient or source donor, and the gene sequencing that is aligned with all of the ethical and research policies and processes that are necessary. Data is then held by a custodian, an authorized custodian. It could be a university, a lab, or an agency. It's analyzed by biomedical experts or researchers. It's shared securely and safely via data access regulations and standards. And then the information can be used by researchers and clinicians and for providing medical and health care. If we go to the next slide. This slide just provides a little more detail with that ecosystem and with all of the associated standardization work that operates within that ecosystem. So standards and guidelines are needed and applied across the consent process with a donor or with a patient. They're applied in the actual sequencing and analysis of that data, which is a very huge detailed amount of work. Standards are applied in the approval of data across requests coming from to a data custodian from a variety of individuals. And standards are applied in all the genomic data sets that are either developed, made available, retrieved, analyzed, and shared between various agencies, jurisdictions, clinicians, and researchers. So this provides you a real good glimpse into the ecosystem within which we must operate and develop and adopt other standards for information and data. Next slide. So this is the scope of our isogenomics informatics work. And this is a real key descriptor of all the work that's underway right now and on into the future. So SC1, the first subcommittee of ISO TC 215, is really aimed at the standardization of data, information, and knowledge. And when we think of data and information, it's quite a broad listing when you think of that. We are focused on the content, the format, the metadata, the models, representations, descriptions, schemas, as well as reference and derived data for genomics. So it's a very broad view to the data and information and knowledge world that we want to look at for standardization. Secondly, given that the word genomics has been a commonly accepted descriptor, it is well and fully acknowledged, certainly in SC1, and I think even broadly, and it's designed right into our scope, that the various omics data includes many different types of omics, so transcriptomics, proteomics, phenomics, epigenomics, metabolomics, and other of these many different omics fields. They are all part of the world of genomics informatics. And so we certainly have some work underway right now in genomics, and that's so we certainly adopt and want to take into account all the different types of omics in our work. And lastly, it should be noted that ISO TC 215 subcommittee 1.
John, we somehow lost your voice. At least I do.
Do you have my voice back now?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, who knows what happens with technology?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, now.
Thank you. I just want to also note that SC1 is there to support human health, as well as Association for Research and Clinical Research, but human health.
Don, can you try again, because it's going a little bit far away now?
Well, I'm right up to my mic right here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's getting on and off now, but just now I could hear you well. I don't know about the others, but I could hear you well now.
Okay, I'll try
Yes.
to speak a little slower. Perhaps that will help. But I would just note that this is for healthcare, for human health, and it's not for animal agriculture or other types of genomics. Could I go to the next slide? I don't know what's happening with the volume, but we'll hope for the best. Next slide, please. So this is the picture, and maybe Ulrike, if you could just point a finger up, or if you can go online and just put up or down with your thumb if people can hear me right, and that kind of thing, so we can test and see if the hearing is coming better or worse. Okay. All right. So the seminal work on genomics was come from a genome biology paper from 2014. And this is being referenced quite widely, and it's the starting point for ISO TC 215 SC1 work. This really depicts the workflow and the business work that really guides all standards work of SC1. And if we look going from top down, we see that genomics informatics starts with next generation sequencing, which generates millions of raw gene sequence reads. In step 2, processing and event detection performs sequence alignment based on a reference genome and detects variations. In step 3, the filtering, review, and validation identifies relevant variants. And in step 4, the annotation and functional prediction really helps identify the biological functions or relationships between the genes. Step 5 generates the interpretation and reports in the clinical sequencing report. And step 6 really evaluates the clinical significance and applies the results to clinical practice and patient care. So this data process and workflow is really critical to driving our whole standards work. And if we go to the next slide, there's one additional piece that we would note and that we are looking at is the workflow step, which became very apparent in the early days of Subcommittee 1 and our early work on that, and the requirement to actually share genomics data between authorized groups, agencies, or organizations. And that may be regulatory groups, it might be health records-based providers, hospitals, cancer clinics, public health labs, or other approved agencies that need to ensure and manage safe, secure, understandable, and appropriate data sharing. Next slide. So the work of SC1 has been built from several years of activity that has been gone on in TC215 in a working group, and really focuses, if we look at those steps that we just identified in the previous slide, focuses to date on steps 3, 5, and 7. The really filtering, review, validation area, the interpretation and report generation area, and the data sharing area. As part of our strategic roadmap, major work that is underway right now, we'll be considering steps 4 and step 6, and indeed perhaps even step 8, as we take a look and really take a close look at how we might expand and grow the impact of standards for genomics informatics across many different organizations. And one of the examples, GA for GH, and we'll get to that more in a moment, is really doing some great work on security and data access right now. And we certainly like to work with them as we move forward in this kind of work. Let's go to the next slide. So Ulrike and several others, we talked about fostering collaboration. We talked about working together among the Joint Initiative Council. And that is really key for genomic standards and genomics informatics standards across the world and across the SDOs. Since 2013, one of the first organizations that we are collaborating with is the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. They are an international nonprofit alliance focused specifically on genomic standards to accelerate the potential of research and medicine to advance human health. They bring together about 600 plus organizations working in healthcare, research, patient advocacy, life science, and information technology, all working to develop frameworks and standards. And some very good collaborative work is already underway between SC1 and GA for GH on the phenopackets data exchange standard. And a FHIR version in the HL7 world of the standard is also under development as part of the HL7 Vulcan program. I'm gonna hit the next button and it'll bring up the next part of the slide. And one more. ISO TC276, thank you. ISO TC276 is another important standards development organization. They are focused primarily on the biotechnology processes and their use in research, particular basic research. And then if we look at HL7, HL7 has a clinical genomics working group that has been very active for a number of years. They've created a number of standards enabling the semantically meaningful exchange of genomics data across research and clinical care. And these standards now have several FHIR implementations. And if we click once more, Snomed. Snomed is an important part of our genomics informatics world. They provide the terminology and linkages to support genomics within the EHR and for EHR and genomics requirements. They also have some very good detailed clinical information that helps inform genomics research. And one more button. And so we like to work together also with some others, and we're at the early stages, and some future collaboration is planned with other JIC SDOs, including CDISC, LOINC, and IHE. But particularly right now, GA for GH, ISO HL7, and Snomed have been closely collaborating with us and closely collaborating on genomics activities for several years, and we all continue to make significant investments in genomic standards. Next slide. This table just gives us a picture of where each of those 4 organizations, the 4 SDOs that have been working together for a number of years now, where their work is underway across the genomics informatics workflow. And this is a table that we've been working on with these organizations through some detailed analysis and some listings that we've had in this past period. And this is based on the standards and the data that each one of those organizations have shared amongst ourselves, and gives us a really good picture of both the current and in some cases the future view of where we will work within our standards. So for our ISO TC215, our ST1, obviously we're also looking at right from number 3 through to number 7, and indeed I think we'll also be looking at number 8 in the near future. And right now, ST1 is working on a roadmap, a key roadmap project to help identify and plan where we want to go and make sure that we don't have overlaps and duplications amongst all of our SDOs. So we have a very effective way to share and communicate what we are doing in terms of standards in ST1. We hope to have that roadmap initially drafted in the April-May time period and certainly have it finalized following that. And on to the last slide, I believe. So this just gives us a summary of what the coordination activities that has been underway in ST1 for the last several years. We've had face-to-face meetings supported through HL7 and through ISO starting in January of 2018, 2019. And our first Genomics International meeting in ST1 was November of 2019. We have a cross-SDO task force amongst several of the SDOs, which we started up in March of 2020. We have some very good cross-SDO standards work already underway in that phenotypical standards development between GA for GH, ISO, and HL7. And we have the detailed project and standards analysis and listings that started up in the fall of 2020, and as we keep on moving on into the future. So I'm really excited about the work of Genomics Informatics and the way that we can help apply standards to the needs of vaccines, the needs of COVID, the needs of cancer care, and the needs of so many other medical and health issues that we all face these days. And with that, I think I will close and turn it back to Ulrike, our moderator.
Thank you very much, Don, and thanks for working with us through some of the issues around the volume. I hope that is better now. So with that, we go into the session on Q&A, and we have got already some questions, and I would like to start with one to Jane. So from Alistair Kenworthy, Jane, you have a question if you can say a bit more about the Snomed CT global patient set and its availability.
Thank you, Ulrike. Yes, the global patient set is a set of Snomed CT content, which was first published in September 2019 and was republished in 2020 in September. And it's a set of Snomed CT content with its identifiers and its descriptions, the clinical descriptions that anybody can use across the globe under a Commons license, and is free for use. And it's got about I think it's got about 28,000 concepts in it. And it included in this is international patient summary content. We've worked very closely with HL7. They've defined the international patient summary that they've worked on, and Catherine talked about using Snomed CT amongst other terminologies. That is included in there and free for use. So you can, it helps with cross-border information sharing. We've also included some general dentistry content, some nursing content, general practice content, as well as I said in my presentation, the COVID content, and we have an implementation guide. So come to our website and have a look at that, and it's available free for use for people to start to define their record keeping using Snomed CT.
Thanks a lot, Jane. Here's a question to, I think, Catherine and Robert. How could the process automation be combined within the IPS? For example, patient with an ongoing periodontitis affecting poor diabetes balance, and perhaps directly a second one, which is how should be and could be standards for cost effectiveness measurements in healthcare be formed?
Would you like to start, Robert? Or?
Sure, thank you. Well, thanks for the question. And Currently, we are using the International Patient Summary for a limited number of use cases, basically planned and unplanned encounters, first encounters with a new healthcare provider or a health system. So it's really not taking into account any ongoing activity and hence the process automation that you're referring to. However, the building blocks do have the capacity to do that, and this is of course being considered for future use cases. Also part of the XE-Health project within Europe, demonstrating the value of the electronic health record exchange format that is being developed in close collaboration with the IPS and HL7 and the other SDOs represented in the JIC. So that's a short answer from my side. Catherine, you can probably provide more detail.
I would like to say that the IPS, we think of the IPS as key to the digital transformation of healthcare and care, where we move to a more data-centric healthcare delivery. And in that sense, we need to bring together a lot of bridges. And one of them is certainly the one between dental care and health and care, who have been for many years considered as disjoint. The quality of data is also a major consideration, and this is what the SDOs working together are striving at. This is what Jane mentioned with the GPS. As much as structured and coded the data are, the better they are used. So the final point that I would like to make in terms of the cost effectiveness, outcomes-based research is key, and managing to have good data that we can assess care is extremely important. So as Robert mentioned, there are many use cases that are coming up. I mentioned the G-Lens, where we would like to understand the level of comprehension and adherence of people once they take a medication. So there, the IPS could personalize things, could tailor the presentation to the needs and the capabilities of the individuals, and then you can measure. But this is just only one case. There are multiple cases, and we certainly want to put the patient, the citizen at the center with their IPS and help the healthcare professionals have a better relationship to their patient, a better collaborative relationship. Back to you, Arleke.
Great, thank you very much. So then one other question, and perhaps Christian, you are perhaps the one who best answers that one. One of the participants is asking, may I know why the WHO, in particular the Family of International Classifications, FIC network, is not a member of this JIC initiative?
Thank you, Ulrike. This is a very good question, actually. The JIC has been developed over the time by, integrating additional, constituents from the first nucleus, which was SEN, ISO, and HL7 International. It has grown over the time because we saw the need to collaborate with other organizations. We understand and we have recognized the need to collaborate with WHO, but we have also to recognize that WHO is not per se a standard development organization. WHO has a different function, which I think everybody knows. And in the context of that, they are developing specific concepts. Of course, everybody will think at ICD, but also INN, ATC, etc. And this is something which is maintained, a bit in a different way by an organization which is different per nature. The collaboration with some of these WHO, I would say, components is something relatively recent. With the Competence Center in Uppsala on pharmacovigilance, this is an old and well-established collaboration. What is brand new is the collaboration with the competence center in Oslo, those maintaining ATC, etc. That's quite new and has started in the context of Unicom. And I'm quite confident that very soon we will have these type of people joining, joining the joint initiative. But no decision has been taken yet, and I think it is a little bit premature. For WHO as headquarters, we have raised a hand to the organization repeatedly and recently still to offer a way of collaboration. And I would say at the level of the IPS, we have already quite a close collaboration, or I would say a good relationship with WHO and some of their programs. So they are, collaborations. They are not exactly necessary under the I would say the label of the joint initiative, but we are establishing these relationships, and possibly that will evolve to the JIC at the right time.
Thanks, Christian. Don, here's something for you. First of all, a compliment, great presentation on genomics. And the questions, where do we see cross-SDO genomics information standards work in the upcoming timeframe?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think there are some areas to look at genomics informatics into the future. One of them is in the whole world of precision medicine and how we can support the assessments and the reporting necessary for precision medicine. And I see certainly HL7, our ISO SC1, our Snomed people, all of us collaborating together to improve and support the world of precision medicine. Another area that I know is underway is perhaps a little more specific to SC1. It's the harmonization across various omics data sets. And as we have data sets in genomics, in transcriptomics, in phenomics, and these areas, we're going to need to have some harmonization of the data and the metadata between these data sets. But perhaps the area that I'm most excited about, and very recent, is some work that I think has some potential in the future, certainly for multiple SDOs, for platforms for data sharing across jurisdictions for genome data. And one of the works, and this work has become apparent to me here in Canada, basically there is something called the COVID cloud, and how we might share data relative to the genome information for COVID and COVID-19 and vaccines. So I think there's some important standards work that will come out to fruition in the future, I hope, for platforms as we look at the work on GA for GH, we look at ISO, we look at HL7, and with SC1, I think we have some really exciting possibilities for some collaborative standards developments, some fostering some great work together.
Thank you, Don. And I think we all are aware data is really the gold of the future, right? We all need that. So then perhaps one question again to Catherine and to Robert, also a little bit connected to the situation we are all in. How can IPS help patients with their treatments in other countries once we can travel again, whenever this might be, but we all hope and look forward to that.
Catherine, you want to go first?
Yes, of course. There is already in Europe, they have the Digital Services Infrastructure Project program, which allows the sharing of patient summaries cross-border. That's one thing. There are also other possibilities, and I think one great possibility is the ability to connect the patient summary to the proof of vaccination for clinical use. And this is something that I hope that will be considered in the upcoming updates of the patient summary standards and their implementation across the globe. Those are specific cases that I could mention. Robert, would you like to add?
Yeah, maybe it's good to mention also the Global Digital Health Partnership, which is a group of e-health authorities from different countries across the globe working together to further the interoperability of health data. And they have a stream focusing on the IPS and the IPS implementation. And one of the things that we see is that the IPS can be adopted and probably will be adopted if it's not already by some of the big vendors like Google, Apple, etc. So you can actually carry your international patient summary with you on your mobile device. That's one of the use cases that we're looking at, so that you can just bring it to your doctor, and hopefully they will also have the infrastructure to actually extract that or receive that international patient summary from you, and also have the infrastructure to provide the translation and the safe translation based on the Snomed global patient set. Because that's one of the reasons Snomed worked together with both HL7 and SEN and ISO to make that global patient set available. So we have one free set of terms that we can all use also in the translation process to the local standards if you're a non-Snomed country, or to your local translations if you are a Snomed country. So that's really the importance of making sure that the information that you have is understood, is available and understood by the healthcare provider in the other country that you travel to.
Thank you, Robert. And let's hope that we will all be able to travel again in the hopefully not too far future. One question to you, Jane. What kind of long-term coding standards you find needed to be formed considering COVID-19? I mean, COVID-19 is I think on all our minds. And I would really also say, how do you develop this coding standard so quickly?
Okay, thanks. I think that's a very interesting question, and I touched on it in my presentation that terminology standards like Snomed and LOINC, and indeed like the ICD, etc. They've all got processes in place to actually develop the terminologies and to release them fast, and that is key. But also it's about working with our individual communities, identifying the needs and being able to respond to them, and then getting the communities like our members, the member states of WHO, to work together to implement them. And I think this is the key thing, is to recognize that also that the different terminologies have got different uses, and continuing to work together on that interoperability so that you can collect the information related to care. And as we start to see the pictures, and in my example of the work in East London, really, really quickly start to use the analytic functions that the systems have got to actually identify where there's gaps in the terminology, but also emerging themes that we need to be starting to collect and make sure we've got. And that the flows also go into the statistical world, the public health world, etc. So working on interoperability between us, working together on the terminology, and actually hearing back from the users as the care advances, what is actually needed out there, and getting it out there fast.
Thank you. Thank you. One last quick question, and I just asked Robert or Catherine to be short on this, which is coming from Sylvia Toon. When will genetic data be included in IPS?
This is a great question. Robert, apologies, so you can chime in. We are working in the case of undiagnosed diseases and rare diseases, and this is an area where genomics are key, and I hope that we soon will have also the data standards that will allow us to do these extensions. It's extremely important, as the IPS is the segue to a more data-driven healthcare. Robert.
Yeah, and in terms of process and the when, probably in a couple of years' time. I mean, we're currently doing the pilot and demonstrator preparations within the XE Health project, and the follow-up into the standards publication process and a revision process will probably take a year or two more. So that's about the time frame that we're looking at. But we'll share all experience with anyone interested.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I would like to let everybody know that there's more information available for you on our website. We have last year published a white paper, which I encourage you to read, where we talk about setting the stage for the future by the Joint Initiative Council. And if you are an organization which is interested in collaborating with us, just send me an email, please. And with that, I would like to thank all of you for participating, for your interest, and of course, our speakers really for being available today and for the great presentations. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day, evening, night, and be safe. Thank you. Bye.